Hello, welcome to Why Wait Till Sunday. I'm Alfred, your host. We are continuing our series on the 2022 class of players. Again, this is to get you ready for the upcoming rookies. There's going to be tons of content going on out there, and we want to get you ready for the next year, especially in Dynasty and Devy. We're always trying to think down the line, so you know what to do with those picks, putting faces to those picks, and not just saying, oh, 2022 first, what does that mean? Is there an elite guy in 2022 first round that you really want to have, or is it kind of a wimpy class? And you need to know these things. So we are continuing along. If you're watching this and you watch the quarterbacks discussion and you like what you hear, please subscribe. Leave something in the comments. That's what we need to make this get even bigger. And my goal is to get everybody into not only Devy, but also college football DFS. This is a super fun thing. It's really exciting to get to know these players. If you're one of these people that likes to know the unknown guy, be the first on the scene, that's how you get to know these players. You got to be invested on Saturday. You have to know what's going on, and choosing these players with your DFS lineups really helps you get to know these guys. So, by the time they're combine eligible and going to the NFL draft combine, you already know all there is to know about these guys. And so there you can have a good opinion and know how to value these players. So that's what I'm trying to do. And every single click, every single like, it helps this get bigger. And, I just want everybody to have more fun. And I have discovered that, doing it myself. So like and subscribe down to the bottom and go ahead and. So starting at the top, Breece Hall, Iowa State. What do you want to say? He's clearly the RB1. I thought I was being kind of smart and tweeting out that he was, the RB1 in 2022. I don't care kind of thing, assuming that people would push back. But most of the people said, no, I think you're right. So it may be unanimous at this point. Broke out as a true freshman, I think led the NCAA in rushing yards or was first or second in attempts as well. Total workhorse, absolute, everything you want, catches passes as well. He looks like he's got long speed, breaking off these big runs for Iowa State against Power 5 competition. He's going to check almost every box by the time he comes out. I think he's 215 pounds, so he's not even a smaller guy. I love it. I love Breece Hall. I mean, he looks great, and RB1 2022. I think he's in an elite category, I would say. I actually have him. If you're talking overall ranks, he's just behind Najee Harris and Travis Etienne for me. And, there's an argument to be said. He is the best college running back out there when you talk about early production, requisite size, ability to catch the ball, long speed, the whole package. There's an argument to be said no one checks every single box the way Breece Hall does. So in that class, for sure, he is my RB1. Isaiah Spiller for Texas A&M has moved up into the RB2 spot. I don't think that's too controversial either. He burst onto the scene as a freshman last year, but then this year really took it up another level. And he looks really good. I would say the long speed might be a little more in question with him, which is nice to have for running back. I mean, love a guy who could break off 75 yards. But either way, I mean, he gets chunk gains. He would have been over 1,000 yards had they played a full conference schedule. And, has caught 45 passes in 2 years, which you love to see. So, he's 6'1", 225. He's going to, size for a running back is more important to me than size for a receiver, really. Because, you just need to be 210 or so to be able to really be able to project a workhorse role, although it can happen for a smaller guy. But he's got it. He's got what you need. He's doing it in the SEC. He did it as a true freshman in the SEC. There's not much more that you can ask from Isaiah Spiller. I like Breece Hall. I think he's more likely to take one to the house, but certainly Isaiah Spiller, not a slouch. Eric Gray sits at my running back 3. And there's a big teardrop here. I mean, Hall and Spiller are cream of the crop, and then you have Eric Gray, who's very interesting. He played a lot as a true freshman, which is always nice to see. Came on at the end of the year, his true freshman season, and then opened up year 2, which I really was hoping to see, kind of like taking the bull by the horns as the sophomore. but they wanted to split the carries almost evenly between senior Ty Chandler. Now, Eric Gray was certainly much better. He had 400-yard games on the season. He caught 30 passes, which is always kind of the name of the game with Eric Gray. He had a game with 6 catches as a true freshman, and then he had a game with 7 catches this year, 8 catches this year against Georgia. So, heavily used in some of these games as a receiver out of the backfield, which is huge to project to workhorse role. He's big enough, 5'10", 205, probably will put on a little bit more. He's a true sophomore with that number. And he had games where he was, racking up 24 carries. He had a stretch in the middle of the season, 24, 19, 31, 22 carries. That's what we want to see. We want to see a guy who can handle that workload, 20-plus touches a game. And he did that, but Ty Chandler still worked in from time to time. And the other slightly concerning thing is on the whole season, he didn't quite even get to 5 yards per carry. I don't love that. I mean, yards per carry is, it's a wonky stat. I would say, one long run obviously can, really make a difference there. And the Tennessee O-line, probably not very good. But still, you would like to see a little bit more explosion. But the quarterback situation at Tennessee was so bad. That offense was awful. He was like the only good thing about the offense, which that's encouraging. I mean, you want a guy, to be the bright spot. Harrison Bailey next year. I think next year is going to be a big year for Eric Gray. Can he take a workhorse role? Can we see 20 touches every single game next year? And can Harrison Bailey elevate the offense a little bit? I think he would be a very, very fast riser on everybody's board when he comes in with a junior season and that offense looks better and declares early, and the rest is history. Kyren Williams is a major riser. He comes in at RB4 for me, and he took a workhorse role at Notre Dame this year. Kind of out of nowhere, to be honest with you. He had 4 attempts as a true freshman last year, but comes in as a true sophomore. 195 attempts. He got to 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns. He was easily the lead running back in the offense. And that's totally what you want to see as a true sophomore. He's big enough, 5'9", 204. If he can get to 5'9", 210, that's plenty big in terms of BMI. I'm not too worried about that. And he looked just fantastic catching balls out of the backfield. He had 27 receptions in their 11 games. Big time riser. He looked explosive. He looked very fast. And was the engine of that offense pretty much. I mean, Ian Book does his thing, but Kyren Williams was really their bread and butter with 13 touchdowns in their 11 games. That is contributing to a lot of their production. And a very exciting player. I'm happy to have him at RB4. And, there's an argument for RB3 ahead of Gray. Not quite in the elite tier. Both of them would still be tier 2. We've got some breaking news. I interrupt your regularly scheduled program. Since the recording of this episode, 2 things have happened. One, Kyren Williams looked fantastic against Alabama, which led me to tweet a little bit about him and say, he's my running back 4 in 2022, etc., which led to some conversation, which then led to somebody pointing out he's actually 195 pounds. Well, I say he's 204, and I went back to look at College Football Reference, which is where I was getting my information, and sure enough, they have corrected it to 195. The team website says 195, but I know it had said 204 previously, and actually kind of Google searched Kyren Williams 204, and I did find it listed somewhere as 204. So I don't know what the mistake was. It seems like 195 is the actual number, and it's kind of a big deal. I mean, that's 10 pounds. I thought, so at this point, I think you can say his, probably his max is going to be 205 by the combine rather than sitting at 205 now. And we can dream on 210, 215. And that does matter. Those 10 pounds kind of could be the difference between teams, at least envisioning him as a potential feature back or a potential third down, kind of plus back, which I think if he gets to 5'9", 205 by the draft, I think that's what most teams are going to see. They're going to see, a guy who could fill in a pinch, but probably going to be drafted as, this is a change of pace on steroids, a change of pace back, with a little extra juice. If he's 5'9", 205, that kind of puts him in that Devin Singletary, Darrell Henderson mold, which is a nice player and certainly can be productive. And, should injuries happen in the team that he's playing for, I'm sure he could give you 25 touches in a given week. But that does limit his, kind of how many years is he going to be a viable option? And how is a team really going to lock and load a guy that size? It's just rare for that to happen. I mean, CMC does it, and he's barely over 200, but he's a unique guy. I mean, usually we can't bet on that. So it doesn't mean that, he's completely off my board or anything like that. In fact, I was thinking about it, and I probably still want him at RB4, but it's worth noting that he's probably closer to RB5, that we'll talk about in a minute, Sincere McCormick, than he is to RB3 right now, which is Eric Gray. And, after watching him against Bama, he looks great. He runs hard. But that draft capital and the way the NFL teams are going to see him is probably going to be just not a feature guy if he, is 5'9", 205 by the time he gets to the combine. So that 10 pounds does make a difference. And just wanted to note that, but I don't think I'm dropping him based on that. Just kind of setting expectations maybe a little bit differently than I had previously. And wanted to update you guys since I got the information before I released the video. All right, on to Sincere McCormick. He's a very fun prospect, and we'll return you back to your scheduled programming. Then we have another guy I'm including in this tier is Sincere McCormick. Now, this is the first guy who is in a G5 conference and not even in a power team in a G5 conference. Like, we're not talking about BYU or Boise State. We're talking about University of Texas, San Antonio. Sincere McCormick comes in as my RB5, and it's just because of his production, regardless of the conference, at such a young age. He burst on as a true freshman, dominated all the work as a true freshman, and then got even better as a sophomore. And this team is not awful. They made a bowl game. McCormick had some games against big teams. Alabama, Birmingham has a decent defense. They were 22 for 150 in that one. Brigham Young, 11 for 42. Army's got a decent defense, 11 for 133 in that game. FAU struggled, 16 for 54. And Louisiana has a pretty good defense, but he got 23 for 122. This is a guy who, did the best that he could against the competition that he faced. He had 249 for 1467 and 11 touchdowns and chipped in 20 receptions for 131. And he's listed at 5'9", 200. So you'd like to see a little more weight. But again, NFL, you don't have to be 230 anymore. I want to see at least 200. And if he's a true sophomore coming in there, I think by the time the combine rolls around, 210's not out of the question for him. Almost 6 yards per carry against North Texas, who granted has an absolutely atrocious defense. He was 23 for 251 and 2, which is totally insane. I like this player. What he's done, he's put on paper already. I can't see a whole lot of guys right now in this class that I would rather take, even coming from UTSA. If he does this again, I would imagine he's going to get day 2 draft capital, in the 3rd round type guy maybe. And really that's all you need to at least get a shot on an NFL team. And I think he'll probably start his career as a change of pace guy. But, one of these players that could work himself into a starting role, and one of these guys where, injury happens ahead of him. And, he has a couple spike games as a feature back potentially. As far as longevity, that's a little concerning, size, and guys coming from these smaller schools just don't seem to have the draft capital that NFL teams keep them around for very long. So all that's baked into him being running back 5, but really like what he's put on paper and on tape for Sincere McCormick. Running back 6, George Halani for Boise State. And, he gets a drop just because it's a G5, Boise State, a little bit more prestige than UTSA, but still, you struggle to find running backs who are really, really, really good for a long time at the NFL level out of those conferences. But he was really good as a true freshman. He's kind of, not super flashy. I would say all the players listed ahead of him, you kind of watch them and they just like pop. They're incredibly explosive. He's more of a, good feet, shifty feet, efficient mover. He's going to kind of skip around tackles and things like that, but probably not going to, just blaze, some incredible 75-yard touchdown run. He was injured most of this year, but he did open with a line against Utah State, 14 for 100 and 3 catches on the ground for 11 yards and 2 total touchdowns. He looked really good in that first game. And since then, I mean, he's really played incredibly sparingly. I think he's only had like 10 total touches in 2, spread across 2 other games since getting injured. So jury's a little out on him. Missing his sophomore year with an injury, but he's already on the map because of his true freshman season. And I still think he's a good player. Should he come back and show us that he's still got it, I'm happy to have him there and maybe even bump him up potentially, depending on how he does and how McCormick does. So then we have Zonovan Knight, who is a true sophomore, and a really frustrating situation, splitting with a clearly inferior back, Ricky Person, who is a junior. So Person may not be gone next year, and that could be a bit of a problem if he continues to split time. And, that may be on a dense coaching staff, but regardless, guys who don't just find a way to dominate their college backfield really are not great bets to dominate an NFL backfield. So everything says Zonovan's the better player. He's got almost a yard more per carry. He's got more receptions. He's got double the touchdowns. It's all good and pointing in favor of Zonovan Knight, and yet he continues to split time with Ricky Person. So, yeah, that stinks. And I thought Person was maybe a senior, but I just checked. He's a junior, so he's not going anywhere. I need to see Zonovan Knight force the issue because the great ones do. Otherwise, he might have to drop. But he's right there. I mean, we're in a range right here that is just kind of guys that have potential, but none of these guys are sure things at this point. Then we have Zamir White for Georgia coming in. He's just a 0 in the passing game. That's why he's all the way down here. I mean, he's a good runner. It does look like he got his burst back this year after double ACL tears. And, has the lion's share for what that's worth at Georgia, which isn't really the true lion's share because of the way they run things down there. But he looks good. He hasn't done anything in the passing game, though. And so if he's a one-trick pony, 2-down grinder, that's just you have to be the absolute elite best of the best to get away with that for fantasy anymore. So, that's why he's down at RB8. He's a great running back, but, even Nick Chubb has a ceiling. A capped ceiling because he's not used very much in the passing game. So, and he's probably the best pure runner in the NFL. Well, Derrick Henry might be the best runner in the NFL, and he's a complete anomaly, a complete unicorn as a guy who can, win weeks without any passing contribution at all. And, I don't want to bet on the next unicorn Derrick Henry type, and I don't think White's that anyway. So if he's not going to contribute at all in the passing game, he gets bumped all the way down to RB8. Mohamed Ibrahim, same guy basically, and he's just going to be a little bit older and doesn't have quite the pedigree that White does. So they're neck and neck, though. Ibrahim did have 1,000 yards as a true freshman. He had an off season as a sophomore and then came back this year, had 1,000 yards again in a short season, was clearly a workhorse. I mean, he pushed 40 carries some weeks or maybe even went over that mark. They just completely leaned on him, which you love to see. I mean, he's obviously a workhorse. He can be a workhorse. No real receiving work at all. He's got 15 receptions in 3 years. Even this year as a workhorse, only 8 receptions in 7 games. So, I'm not saying he can't, but he's certainly not been used as that. And that's a concern. He's right there with White as a similar type of player. Tyler Algier for BYU as a redshirt sophomore. He had a really nice season, 1,000 yards for BYU, 7.5 yards per carry in this explosive offense led by Zach Wilson. 14% of his runs were over 15 yards. That's fifth in the nation in terms of, kind of that long run. People call it different things, breakaway rate or whatever you want to call it. But that's really impressive. He has almost twice as many carries as the next closest guy, 150 to 83 in the next running back there. He caught 14 passes in their 12 games, so not incredible, but something better than some of these other guys. So that is part of his game as well. He's interesting. Again, redshirt sophomore, breakout in his third year for running backs. That's not quite as concerning. I mean, receivers need to separate, in my opinion, from their receiver room earlier. Running backs, there's only one guy, so sometimes you just can't quite get on the field in the same way as a receiver can. So I'm a little more lenient there. Redshirt sophomore is just fine for me. And he had a really, really nice year. Love to see him do it again next year. And things could really be pointing up for Tyler Algier. He is on the map. I'm putting him at RB10 right now because of some question marks with some other guys. And there's some honorable mentions here that aren't ranked, but, belong in the top, belong right after this in some order. We got Remon Davis. He probably might be in a lot of people's top 10. We just didn't know. He was pretty good at Temple last year, commanded a lot of volume, wasn't terribly efficient, but caught some passes. I have concerns with, his overall speed and whether or not he's got, what it takes to break, big chunks, especially at the next level. We will have to see. He's transferred to Vanderbilt. Obviously, that's in the SEC. So we will see him against some of the best defenders that the NCAA has to offer. If he can make something happen, he'll easily jump right back in. But the jury's a little out on Remon Davis. He gets, very much a chance to shine next year. Tyler Goodson for Iowa. The big problem here is he looked good as a true freshman, and then this year had split a lot of time with Mekhi Sargent for Iowa, and technically wasn't the best runner between the two of them. I mean, he commanded the most volume, but Sargent was a little bit better on a per carry basis against the same defenses and with the same offensive line, and they both scored the same amount of touchdowns, 7 apiece. So a little concerning that even after a good freshman year, he wasn't able to really take the reins and dominate in terms of production. He takes a step back. And, these are where I'm trying to predict things 2 years out. So I got to make changes, and we'll, as more information comes in next year, we'll make those changes there. And we have a guy here who is a redshirt sophomore for Appalachian State, who really didn't play a whole lot this year until later in the season, because they had a guy, Dietrich Harrington, who was kind of the presumed starter, when the season opened up, but he got injured. And I'm talking about Cameron Peoples, who came in and was sensational. This guy was just unbelievable, and this is why I think, daily fantasy and knowing these depth charts is really, really helpful. So, Harrington had 100 carries in the first 6 games, pushed almost 20 carries a game, and Peoples was kind of an afterthought. And Harrington was good, averaged almost 6 yards per carry, and contributed a little in the receiving game. And he was a good little player, and he was on my radar already. But then Peoples comes in mid-season when Harrington goes down, and he just obliterated the competition. I mean, he's got 3 games with less than 10 carries, including 1 game where he didn't really play at all, except for, I think, special teams. And yet on the season, he's got 169 carries for 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns. Against North Texas, he went completely off, and we've already talked about how terrible they are, but 23 for 319 and 5. I mean, I don't really care if it's against Pee Wee. That is something. He actually had 27 for 178 against a good Coastal Carolina defense. Almost put up 100 against Louisiana, 21 for 99, who has a decent defense for their conference and everything. Really, really impressive season, this guy. And he, I mean, not even on any radar. He's 6'2", 210, which is, that's good enough. And, honestly, the one that really gets me is the big game against Coastal Carolina, 27 for 178 and a touchdown. That's a pretty good defense at Coastal Carolina, and they have been rock solid all year. And Cameron Peoples kind of torched him. Keep an eye on this guy. Redshirt sophomore. He's going to be a redshirt junior next year. And if he takes, the lead again and has even remotely this type of season, he's going to be on a lot of people's radars. Darrington Evans just got drafted in the 3rd round out of Appalachian State. Much smaller back than Peoples, but this is something to keep an eye on here. This is a school that can produce NFL talent. We know that over the last couple of years, and very interested in what Cameron Peoples can do. Jarian Ealy for Ole Miss, and this could get some people upset, that he's not in the top 10. I know some people really like him. And he's just one of these guys we've talked about, hitting some weight marks for these other guys, and Ealy just doesn't quite get there. We're going to need to see him pack on, 15 to 20 pounds from where he's lifted at right now as a true sophomore. Certainly not impossible. He's 190 pounds now. It's just that's part of what you have to, to be able to project any kind, even kind of a 3-down back plus. And certainly, a feature back, even sniffing a feature back potential, I'm going to need to see 205 at absolute minimum at 5'9". So that remains to be seen, but his talent is certainly evident. He's extremely fast, extremely sudden. He catches pretty well. He's got 35 catches in his first 2 years. And averaging almost 6 yards per carry, and has a lot of touchdowns, 17 touchdowns in 2 years as a true freshman and true sophomore. They certainly did use some other players near the goal line, which kind of speaks to that whole size issue again. So, certainly a guy that has some work to do. He's just not top 10 for me. I think he's a later pick at this point who – you could maybe say 3-down change of pace with a little bonus, because I think he's very talented, but the volume probably won't be there. In an absolute perfect dream scenario, maybe he becomes an Eckler type, but even Eckler, we saw him get limited touches last week for the Chargers, and game script and certain scenarios, like he's just not going to be a guy who's on the field for every single play. That's not what's going to happen. Doesn't mean he can't be useful, but you're projecting years out and you're putting guys on your Devy roster that you want stud potential. These guys that you can rotate who are bit players and can have spike weeks. Those are waiver guys. Those are guys that you have on your bench. That's not a guy you want to waste your precious Devy slots. You may only have 3, you may only have 6 or 7. You want blue chip potential. And so he just doesn't quite get there for me. And then you have kind of even a tier, honorable mention tier below, but I want to give you all these names, put them on your board, put them on your map, pay attention to them, follow them along in, even in daily fantasy. We've got Jarek Broussard for Colorado. He's, again, kind of small, 185 pounds, I believe. But he's a junior for Colorado, and he just worked as a total workhorse this year, kind of out of absolutely nowhere. But, this guy pushed 20 carries, 30 carries a game, which you love to see. Had a great yards per carry in their games. Granted, they didn't play that many. Really dominated the work here for Colorado, had 6.3 yards per carry, which is pretty sensational. He had, he had over 20 carries in the first 4 games. His lowest total was 25. He had 30 carries twice. That just kind of doesn't happen in college anymore. He also had 7 receptions in their 5 games, so a little there. I think it's certainly worth mentioning. This guy was completely off every single radar and comes in and was an absolute workhorse running back for Colorado and acquitted himself pretty well. He only had 3 touchdowns in the first game against UCLA, did not score after that. He got vultured a couple times. He had a very strange game against Arizona where he ran for 300 yards but did not get in the end zone. Watching some film, as you might expect, running for 300 yards and not getting into the end zone, he had a couple big carries that he was caught. So, if you're telling me this guy's 185 and is getting caught from behind on big runs, that is certainly concerning. So keep that in mind, but certainly a watch list type guy and made somewhat of a name for himself this year. SaRodorick Thompson for Texas Tech is an interesting name. He is 6 feet 210. He is a redshirt sophomore and had a nice season as a redshirt freshman last year, scoring 12 touchdowns. And then this year in the abbreviated season, he still led the backfield with 100 carries. But a true freshman, Taj Brooks, had 70 carries. So didn't quite dominate the backfield the way that you might want to see it, especially against a true freshman coming in and getting that much work was a little concerning. He didn't have the best yards per carry for his team, although he did score the most touchdowns. So he's on the radar. He's interesting, but redshirt sophomore. It didn't command that level of domination of his own backfield. I need to see a little bit more from Thompson, although he did have 21 receptions in their 10 games. So that's something. We like to see that. A deep name that really came on as the season progresses, Mateo Durant for Duke. This is a guy who's a junior and was pretty sensational. He averaged almost 7 yards per carry this year on his 120 carries. He scored 8 touchdowns. He caught 12 passes in 11 games for 9 yards a reception. And, Deion Jackson was a guy that a lot of people, I think, who like Duke thought would be a big-time player for them. And Durant has just come in and been sensational. He's in the last 7 games. He had 4 games over 100 yards, 7 touchdowns in those last 7 games. He caught 11 of those passes in the last 7 games. So really the last 7 games for Durant were absolutely fantastic. And one of those was almost completely nothing when Duke struggled mightily against North Carolina State, where he had 7 carries for 9 yards. I think the whole team just kind of went into a shell. So, we're getting the sample size is getting smaller and smaller, but if you throw that game out, he finished his season with 4 out of 6 games over 100 yards. And, wasn't even seeing 20 carries. I mean, he was incredibly efficient, long runs. And I think he's a really interesting player heading into next year, which will be his senior season. So, take it with a grain of salt. We're talking about a senior running back, but very interesting guy to keep on your radar. If he comes in next year, I think they should hand him all the work. I don't know why they would keep feeding, Jackson, who really was gross this year. I mean, 4.2 yards per carry versus 6.8. Just not even close. So I think he's a name to watch for Duke. And then we have Tion Dollard. He plays for Akron. And he was a really, really good junior, I believe junior college transfer, and definitely a name to keep in mind if you're playing DFS on the max slates. He was really, really good for the Zips. Really the only good thing to talk about in that offense. He's 5'11", 205, and averaged about 6 yards per carry, had 10 receptions in 6 games, which we like, and certainly one to watch for next year. It's a G5 team in Akron, but we like to keep these names on our radar. You don't want to be surprised. You want to at least know about these guys, and then you can act quickly when they start proving it again and again. Guys falling out of the list pretty much completely that I am basically not even interested at all anymore, certainly out of the top 10. But that's Zach Charbonnet for Michigan. He wasn't even really close to starting this year. He had 19 attempts on the season and logged them across 5 different games. So I mean, he played in 5 games. He had 19 attempts. So I don't know if he was injured and playing or just a complete afterthought. He had one long run for a touchdown against Minnesota, who has the worst defense in the Big Ten probably. And other than that, did virtually nothing. So 5-star recruit looking like a bust right now. Stevie Scott was a guy I liked for Indiana who kind of, commanded a bit of a heavy market share as a sophomore. And then going to this year, was kind of excited about him, but man, he was just blah. I mean, no explosion. He looked slow, this is one where the average yards per carry really does paint the picture. I mean, 3.4, terrible. I mean, he looked bad. He just looked really bad. I don't think he's a very good athlete or player, that translates really at all to the next level. John Emery Jr. for LSU. This was a 5-star. I mean, we got 2 5-star potential busts here, and he was lingering on Devy rosters and Devy lists. I don't know what to do with him. Absolutely nothing for LSU, even in a season where they had a completely unsettled backfield. I thought, there were people that thought he would come in as a freshman and take over. Of course, Clyde Edwards-Helaire had his monster season. And then even this year, when they were searching for someone to take the lead, he was not even the most carries on. He did not even have the most carries on his team or the most touches out of the backfield. He was the most efficient with 5 yards per carry. But man, unless he totally explodes as a junior next year, he's got this Tyrion David Price who's in his same class, so no one's going to be leaving early there, who had the most touches out of the backfield, tied for the most touchdowns. They're sharing work. Neither one of them look great. I mean, Emery has flashed a little bit, and Davis Price is more of a grinder, just a big-bodied, kind of just forced the issue between the tackles type. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to do. No one has taken the lead here, and Davis Price is also off the list for this class. I'm just not excited about these guys. Completely failed to separate at all. And LSU is going to keep bringing in, good players. And I don't know. I mean, could be a late riser. If one of them pops next year as a junior, I think we can revisit and be interested again, because they do have pedigree. They do, would potentially be doing it in the SEC should that happen. But right now, that stock is dropping for me. I mean, you want to see these guys in their second year do something. And, when they haven't, that's super concerning. So that wraps up running backs. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, like and follow below. And we're going to do receivers next for the 2022 class. So be on the lookout for that. And, we'll see you out there in those Devy streets.